All right, Jeffrey, you should include Guan and now you know the middle name Guan. Why your grandfather put that in there? Because he want to keep track of the family name Guan. Because although your paper son name is Lee, but he had the desire to keep the family name Guan. All right, Jeff's grandfather is last name is Guan, and he came from a village called Jiangtun in Kaipen County. We have been proved that's the right name, Jiangtun, and I got the name from Judy, and I look at the map, and it's been proven, and it's in Cekham. Cekham is it's a town, but it's a jurisdiction. So Jiangtun is a village in Cekham. And okay, but what Judy told me, the family name is Jiang. At first I thought Jiang would be that's a common, very common family name Jiang. But then Jiang, it could mean like literally Munjiang, it means literally writing. That's one word for it. And then Jiang is like Jiang Muk Lung. It's that's the three words that could Jiang. I thought maybe she forgot, she could have made a mistake. But then when I went home, I thought, I thought I had seen the word before, Jiang. Then I thought, yeah, I was quite sure that Jiangtun is actually a name of the village. But when Jason sent a map over and showed me, then I know for sure that Jiangtun actually is the name of the village, and it's in Cekham Township. And he said it wasn't too far away from McCoys Li. That's your that's your mother's Situ village, right? Your mother's, yeah. And then he actually said it wasn't too far away, and it's the right place because it's just the two places that's separate by a river, across the river. So those village names are quite sure now that they are right one. And I look at the map, I couldn't find the Situ, McCoys, the other one, but it's nearby because the map's kind of hard to find. But Jiangtun actually shown there, so it's really right. Would be easy to find.
My name is Jason Wu. I'm 20 years old. I was born and raised in Toronto, and I've recently come back to China and Hong Kong to work in an internship. And I'm nearing the end of my work experience now, so I've come back to Taishan to visit my family, discover some of my roots, and it just so happens that Jeff is in the area at the same time, so I'm going to be his tour guide for the next few days. Yeah.
My name is Benny. Hello.
This is my first cousin, Benny Wu, and he's going to be our driver for the next few days.
So we started out by going to the village of Fook, which is called Jiangtun, which directly translates to the village of camphor trees. So first thing, we went to the village secretary at the service stop where the villagers in the area would go to do their civil services such as health card, driver's licenses, and also applying for social insurance. So we spoke to the secretary who was stationed there. He was a Guan, as with most of the people that lived in this cluster of villages. And he said that, sure, I'll bring you guys down to the village. So he brought us down to the village, and the first thing he let us know is that you know, Camper Village is a very, very big village, and it's actually divided into 4 sections based on the ponds that exist in front of the village. So we got there, we spoke to a few older people, told them about, you know, the situation with Fook Lee immigrating very, very early on. His family having never really come back to this village, except about a decade ago when Judy and her daughter had come back. And we thought that this would be enough to work with and enough to spark people's memories, considering that Judy's daughter is Caucasian and does not have the same skin color as most of the people in this area. But to our surprise, no one had any recollection of this visit at all. So we decided that we would ask where we could take our next step, and it was proposed to us that we would go to the Guan library in the market town just west of this village. So we did go over there under the guidance of the secretary who brought us over. He hopped in our car and brought us over to the town. We got off and we went into the library, and we spoke to the man who was in charge there. He was very familiar with the lineage of Camper Village, and he had already started looking through it before we had gotten there, because one of the village elders, or one of the older men in the village, had phoned up this librarian and let him know that we were looking for Fook Lee. We had the Chinese name for Fook Lee, which was Fun Thui, and also his son's name, Kim Fu, but it was nowhere to be found in the lineage book. This lineage book is actually being published later next year and should be available to be sold by the time that you visit next year. So we talked to the librarian a little bit more. He tried to understand the situation and the circumstances that the immigration of Fook Lee and what had happened in between. And later I found out that he's actually the older brother of my aunt. She's not actually biologically related to me, but she was a very close friend and a former co-worker of my mom in Toronto when she first arrived in Canada. So I added him on WeChat, and we also have the WeChat contact for the secretary who led us around as a tour guide. So when we do have more information, we will provide them with this, and hopefully we can come to a conclusion about the lineage of Fook Lee and how that connects with the rest of the clan. So seeing that there wasn't much that we could do with that anymore yesterday, we decided that we would carry on with the Situ lineage. When we mentioned that to the librarian and other Guan people, they were like, that should be a lot easier. Number one, considering that you actually have the names of your grandmother's brothers and their sons and their grandchildren. And also considering that Situ villages is in general are much smaller than Guan villages for an unknown reason. So we made our way over there after we had dinner in Jiangchun, in Camper Village, which is the cluster of Situ villages are just across the river. So we headed down back into the town, crossed the bridge into the island that the Situ villages are located on, and we parked the car. And because this was a cluster of smaller villages, it was quite hard to navigate through. We took one road that got into the cluster. I got off the car and asked one lady, an older lady, where the village secretary, where we could find him or them. And she let us know that, all these roads are connected, but not all of them are accessible completely by car. So you're gonna have to go back out into the field onto the highway and come back in the next entrance. So we did that and we went in. We
roads that were available to us, and still couldn't find the village secretary. And usually they're they're in plain sight. They're very easy to look for because, of course, they're a service stop for the villagers, and also a contact place for people that are coming from outside. So I asked another older gentleman that was next to our car when we had parked it the second time. He let us know that it's further in, and he told me the specific way to get in. So we parked the car closer to, as close as possible that we could get to the office of the village secretary. And then I got off the car and I went over to the stop. There were several people there, 3 people, and one lady who was sitting in the front. She asked me, how can I help you? Or what would you like? And I told her that I was here with a relative, Jeff. We're not actually related, but saying it's a relative is just easier to explain. So I let her know that a relative is here to look for the ancestry of his paternal grandmother. I let her know that it was Jeff's paternal grandmother's village was called Muay Kai, or Plum Creek. And she said, oh, it's just behind here. Let me show you the way. So we walked over. She brought me to a man and said that he's helping someone look for the ancestry, and their ancestry is in your village. Later we found out that that was a village chief. So before Jeff had joined me, I let him know that we are looking for, he's closely related to a white who Jeff met in Los Angeles before coming to China. And his father's name is Bak Siu, and his uncle's name is Bak Fun, and they have their grandfather's names are Su Sun and Su Kiu. So then immediately this was a lot more fortunate for us, because the village chief said, oh, I know exactly who you're talking about. You know what, I'll show you the way to a cousin that still lives in the village. He's cousins with a white who now lives in Los Angeles. And I said, oh great, let me just go get Jeff. So I went back to the car, found Jeff, told him to come with me. And so we went back through this cluster of villages to the village and found the village chief again. And he led us to an alley in the village, quite far into the back of the village, and then he knocked on the door. It took a little while for someone to come answer the door, but then we found out that we were speaking to Wai's cousin and also the second cousin of Jeff, and his name was Aikin. So Aikin has stayed in the village for most of his life, and he was born in the same house that his grandfather and also Jeff's grandmother were born in. We found him in the house across the alley from him, and the alley is only about a meter and some more apart, or wide. So he was basically the housekeeper for both of these houses. He said that our family used to own both of these houses. I currently live in one, and I use the other one for storage, and it's also the ancestral home. So we would never demolish it or even think of renovating it at all. Just maybe some simple cleanups and repairs here and there. So we went in and he offered us a bench. It was a very vernacular kind of handmade wooden bench. We sat down on it and I asked him, do you know your lineage? And he said, I'm not quite sure of my own lineage, but I do have it written on my ancestral altar. And the ancestral altar was on a platform sort of at the second level of the house. So then he gave me his chair, and I stood on the chair and I took a look at the names on the ancestral altar. It was quite hard to see because it was a wooden plaque that had been probably written at least 3 decades ago, and that's what he told me as well.
this plaque he had never changed ever since writing it the first time, and it's always been sitting on that platform above the living room where a normal ancestral altar should sit. So he says that every time someone passes away, I don't rewrite this plaque. I just keep adding their names to the side of the altar or on a side wall of the living room, which is quite different from what I do in my own village. For reference, when a new generation of ancestors pass away, for example, my grandmother passed away earlier this year, then we always maintain 4 generations of ancestors on our altar, which means that the earliest generation of ancestors in the 4 generations will be omitted in the new writing, so that we can include my grandmother and my grandfather in the altar. So he let us know that he's never taken away any of the writing. The only time that it was tampered with was during the Cultural Revolution. But after the Cultural Revolution, he copied back down the names. I'm not quite sure where he found the names after the Cultural Revolution, but there was something about it having existed in another house that was untouched by the Red Guards, I guess. So I asked him, this plaque that you're showing us in your house that you're living in currently is quite, it's quite hard to, it's not quite legible. Maybe in the other ancestral house, is there a better altar? He said, there is another altar. The writing is probably the same, but I can show you guys can come. So the second house we entered was the house that Jeff's grandmother was born in. So there was a ladder there for the platform for the ancestral altar, and I climbed up on the altar, I climbed up the ladder to take a look at the altar, and I took a few photos with Jeff's cell phone, and the names didn't match up. So I came back down and we asked him, can we take photos of the altars? And he said, oh, it's probably not that great to do that. And we had already done that for all of the altars, so I did let him know that we did do that. But I did copy back down all of those names, all of the ancestors' names, into my notebook here, and I've added them into my computer thus far. So in the altars in the 2 ancestral houses, we were able to find, counting from the paternal grandmother of Jeff, her name is Shee, or her Chinese name was Chun. There were 5 generations above her that we found through the altars. And using these 5 generations of names, we were able to locate the lineage in the Situ library earlier today. We purchased 2 books from the Situ library, one containing the very early ancestors and lineages that spread off into all of Guangdong, and then a volume called Volume 6, number 6, which contains the lineages for the particular lineage for Plum Creek and other villages that have close ancestors. Then we also asked Agin, which was the second cousin that lived in Plum Creek. Do you have any recollection of a great aunt that married off to a Guan family? And to be specific, this is Shee that we were asking about. And he said, as a young child, I do remember going across the river with my mother and grandmother to visit a great aunt, a sister, a 4th sister of my grandfather. Actually, the front of our village, we're able to see the top of their house. And I let him know that, oh yes, we were there earlier. There were several old people who were telling us, speaking to Jeff, this is, your grandmother, was she not the second wife of your grandfather? And we said, yes, that's what relatives have told us. And this is Shee, to be specific. Do you have relatives in Guangzhou who worked in the post office? Did you have a relative in Beijing who worked for the government? And we said, there is a little bit of stories about that, but we're not quite sure of the logistics. the old people, and I'm speaking about the camper village now, they were saying, oh yes, this must be them then. They have some relatives that live in Changsha, in Sanfao, the county seat for Kaiping. But recently, their son passed away and they're not in a very good mood. You guys should probably hold off from contacting them. They're the ones that own the keys to the ancestral home in Camper Village. But you know, they've been quite busy with the things on their mind lately. So maybe you guys should contact them in a better time. So in the end, we were unable to retrieve the lineage for Fook Lee, although it was verified by the second cousin in Wikai in Plum Creek, who was pointing across the river at the house that we had visited in Camper Village, saying, that is where my great aunt married off to. She married a Guan in Camper Village. And with the old people comparing how many sons and how many daughters that the person that they were speaking of, who we were trying to look for, it made sense that these were matching people. This was exactly who they were talking about. But unfortunately, they were unsure of the lineage or the clan that specifically Fook Lee came from, so we were unable to trace that. And again, his name didn't show up in the records at the Guan library. So they weren't villages, they were large clans that each had clusters of villages across Cekham, or Chikan is how it's been Romanized. So stories have said that north of the river is where the Guans live. So their villages, from what the old people in Camper Village have told us, the Guan villages are much more larger and they stay as a really large pack most of the time. These Situ villages, on the other hand, exist in clusters of smaller villages. So although they also act as a pack, they're in distinctive hamlets from one another. The love-hate and relationship between the two clans exists because, of course, when these are two very powerful clans, it made sense for them to have business deals, marriage deals, relationships between one another. But at the same time, there's obviously a power struggle of some sort. If you're building a bridge, then we're going to build a bridge. If you built a library, we're going to build a library, but we're going to do it better. If you're compiling the lineages for all of your clan, then we're going to do the same. If you're going to do panoramic photos for all of your villages, this one being for the Guan villages, then we're going to do the same as well. And this is a Situ village, or Situ villages. So this love-hate relationship is sort of a love-hate is what I called it. I guess the relationship is these two very powerful clans in the area who each occupy one part of the market. The Guans occupying the upper harbor, Xiangfo, and the Situs occupying the lower harbor, Hafo. They're just a power struggle between them, but also seeing that the other respective clan was the only other worthy opponent, but also the other worthy clan of marrying into or taking a daughter-in-law or son-in-law from. So this is what I call the love and hate relationship between the Situ and the Guans. So Cekham in historic maps, it was actually called Cekham Fell, which means the Cekham Harbor. So it used to be a harbor town, a port, and you'll notice that particularly where they've preserved a lot of these storefronts and introduced a lot of tourism into is the shop fronts that are along the river, because number one, those were the most valuable pieces of property, being right in front of the river and being able to transport the goods right from the river off the boats into the shops, but also it being the face of this harbor town. We always say don't judge a book by its cover, but in the end we always do judge a book by its cover, and we also judge a town by its shop fronts. It used to be one of the larger urban areas in Kaiping. I believe at one time it was even the county seat for a very short time, and that's why just east of the town along the river you'll find what they call the first school of Kaiping, which is sort of a numbering system for all of the schools in Kaiping. They call it the first one because it was the first public school that they established in Kaiping, and it being in close proximity to Cekham really showed that this was a vital commerce area, and at one point also an administrative area for the whole county. And today, in recent years, everyone's been hearing about this taking back of land, of the historical sites, of the historical shopfronts in Cekham. They say that there is a lot of unfair treatment of the inhabitants and also unfair compensation for the land they're taking back. Also some road closures that the government and other affiliated parties would put in place to sort of force residents out of the town by cutting off electricity, water, contact to the outer world. Today and yesterday we walked through the markets and we saw it's I guess these reinforced concrete towers, neoclassical style, Byzantine, Gothic, all these different sort of architectural styles that really showed the diaspora culture of the people of Kaiping, and particularly from this village, of this town, and the two clans that run it. And it's quite a shame that they're trying to rebrand this as a purely tourism area, that they're trying to reamp it up so that it can be beautiful and clean and all these things that aren't really what represent Kaiping and Cekham and the history of our people in these areas. Aw Wing Tom, dạ hô à.
Quý trọng Vĩnh Trang Quốc, Sở Trang Quốc, Hàm Đại Học.
表妹好人，又好乖，我希望佢真係好長命。
我叫司徒偉，我係司徒玉春，係我姑婆。我1965年嚟美國，我爸爸係叫做司徒百兆，我媽媽叫做吳思橋。我4歲離開中國，5歲離開中國，65年嚟美國。
What happened after we came back from China, and that was a phone call with Judy, your cousin, who disclosed her grandfather's name, and her grandfather's name was Fun La. She also let us know that growing up she referred to Fook Lee as Sam Gong, which means third grandfather, which lets us know that Fook Lee must have been the third son in his family, and possibly that Fun Hua, Judy's grandfather, must have been older than Fook Lee. I looked through the records, the photos of the records that I took in the Guan library when we visited the town of Cekham, hoping that we would be able to track down maybe your father's name or your grandfather's name, but we were unable to find it. So we took the photos of the relevant pages anyway, so that later on, if we found more information, we could look back into these photos. And I found one particular man named Fun Hua. It didn't show that he had any siblings, but that could very well be because he was the only son that was left in China at the time when they were recording these records. So we were unable to confirm with Judy whether or not this was her grandfather, this particular person in these genealogical records. But one thing to point out is that this particular man has a great-grandson who currently lives in Sunda, according to these genealogical records. And this completely aligns with Judy's story of her visit to Camphor Village years ago, and she was guided by a nephew who was living in Sunda at the time. So until we can confirm his name, I guess we will still leave this as an open question whether or not the grayed out ancestors that I have written in your Guan genealogical chart, whether or not those are the correct ancestors. So until we're able to confirm that, I wish the best with your genealogical endeavors and the best of health to you and Betty. The story of our arrival to Jiangtun, the Camphor Village, through your Guan grandfather. So when we arrived, one particular villager was quite surprised to learn that you didn't speak Chinese. You were unsure of your uncle's names and your great-uncle's names, who would help to prove which lineage you came from. So he said, if he doesn't speak Chinese, then how does he know that this is his village? And the village secretary that was acting as our guide said, well, just look at his face. He has all our facial features. He must be a Guan. So we found this quite hilarious. I just wanted to reiterate this on video so that we would have record of it.